I was riding the chairlift up when I was skiing this winter, and I got a lecture from a nurse about how the biggest problem in our diet is that we eat too many seed oils. I was like, you don't say.
Canola oil is one of the healthiest cooking oils. When the canola seed arrives at the processing factory, it contains foreign material, mostly plant pieces. The seeds pass by a magnet. It removes any metal that may have fallen in during the journey from field to factory.
What are you eating right now? Are you eating self-hatred? Well, today we have a returning guest. He's a good friend of mine, a partner in crime through all the seed oil mayhem that we've stirred up through the years. And he joins us now. I think it was enough warmth in the atmosphere. He was so busy patrolling the ski slopes of the mountains that I couldn't bear to take him away from his duties. But now that it's a little warmer outside, he's got some time for us to return on our program. Tucker Goodrich, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, David. How are you? Good to talk to you again.
It's great having you back. And, we used to, when I had the daily radio show, you were on at least once a week, and we had a lot of great discussions there and interacted with a lot of great researchers, Bruce Hammock and other folks that we've talked to along the way. So it's always great to reconnect with you because a lot of journey we've had together.
Absolutely. That was great. I miss your show, David. That was really something I looked forward to.
Well, we might do it again sometime. Sometimes you got to take a break from radio to find the right way back in if you want to go down that route. So who knows? We still do the show and we may do a daily radio show. But nevertheless, our efforts at that time was to try to bring the seed oil topic to the everyday man. And I think we've done a good job at contributing to that. Now, seed oils is becoming quite the topic that everybody's thinking about now. They're not sure exactly the details, but they generally know there's something not right with some of these vegetable oils, huh? And a lot of credit has to go to you. I mean, you were out there before it was cool. You were going on the podcast, all the health and nutrition shows, singing the warnings, and you were out there. There's a lot of folks out there that have put you on their show, on their health shows. Dr. Kate Shanahan was another early voice, and Dr. Ray Peat, who I recently posted some of our discussions with him for the first time, uploading them to X. We've had them on other platforms over the years, but we had just now uploaded them to X, and you participated in my first interview with Ray Peat about milk and sugar and all these big issues that surround PUFA. And then we also did an obesity panel, where you and Kate Shanahan and Peter Dobromilski, Brad Marshall, and Ray Peat all joined together, which I thought was a really cool thing to see everybody, all the family gathered together for one little meeting, and of course that was timely because Ray passed a few years after that. So a lot of great discussions.
Yeah. Sadly, the only thing I can tell you about diet with 100% certainty is that even if you get it perfect, you're still going to die.
Yeah.
And Ray, unfortunately, was no exception to that rule. There are no exceptions to that rule. But yeah, no, those were a lot of fun. And I mean, being able to talk to Ray Peat was definitely a high point for me. So I really appreciate the fact that you were able to make that happen.
Now, having said that, I'm going to ask you a question. Generally speaking, we want to talk a little bit about the general state of seed oil awareness and both the science. What's the latest PUFA science studies that you're paying attention to, both for pro-PUFA or anti-PUFA? And then we want to get into the general public and what's going on in that discussion. But as it pertains to Ray Peat's approach, have you, generally speaking, become more pro Ray Peat through the years after your encounters with him, or less after the years of you meeting him?
Well, one of the great things I learned a lot from reading Pete's stuff, and I learned a lot by going back and reading it after I had gone off on my own and come to a greater understanding, because his style of writing was so dense, not in a bad way, but just, he packed an enormous amount of information into his articles, and he would just kind of, go along and along and along. And I would come back to it a few years later and I was like, oh, all that stuff that I struggled to learn was in Ray Peat's articles. And I just didn't understand enough to get what he was saying. The most interesting thing I learned as far as where I differ from Ray Peat, I reposted on my Substack today an old article of mine called Yes, Virginia, the Paleo Diet Was Low Carb, where I went through the anthropological evidence for carbohydrate intake. And that was something that he and I disagreed on. And I think that was a crucial point of disagreement. And I go through it in this article today, the evidence for increased carbohydrate consumption, decreasing human health is, I think, overwhelming, going all the way back to the end of the Paleolithic when people started eating things like starchy acorns and started rotting their teeth out, right? And that's something where, we don't know how much they weighed. We don't know whether or not they had diabetes, but we can tell if their teeth had cavities. And we went from, so that he didn't accept that evidence, and he thought that humans needed a much higher carbohydrate content in the diet than I think our evolutionary background really calls for. But,
that's ultimately the big divergence between critics of the PUFA paradigm. I know there's a lot more than just that, but to me, the big issue for people trying to heal from PUFA poisoning is which fuel should be thy medicine primarily. Should it be fat, or should it be a carbohydrate-based
animal fats?
Yeah, animal fat. Yeah. You don't really have much options. You don't really have much options after you remove PUFA when it comes to fat other than animal fats, but
and I don't think Pete and I were all that different. I think, humans evolved from animals that ate fruit, monkeys living in trees. So the question is,
and from a Christian standpoint, the Garden of Eden started with fruit, right?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when God asked Adam to name all the animals, he named livestock separately from the wild animals. And livestock are animals that you eat. And at the very, very beginning, there was a distinction between animals that we eat, the livestock, and the wild animals.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't agree with that interpretation of Genesis that says that we were eating a vegan diet at the beginning. I think from the very beginning, we had animals who we ate. And, Adam's son was a shepherd and, died because his brother, who was a farmer growing only plants, was jealous because God preferred the sacrifice from the shepherd over the sacrifice from the farmer. So yeah, I think going all the way back to the beginning, there's, that argument is literally as old as time, apparently.
But that's the big question is people say, my God, okay, PUFA is a problem. To what extent is the next question? And then the second question is, well, what are you going to do to heal yourself from it? Is it going to be carbohydrate or is it going to be fat? And I think that's where a lot of people still, including myself, I don't know I still don't have the final answer on that. I'm still testing it out on my own life. I have to tell you, the more I do a lot of, activities and some other industries that I may be involved in, the more I feel like, a cup of orange juice isn't so bad, A
cup of orange juice isn't a bad thing. And I know, the biggest change I made to my diet after fixing my diet was I started eating more sugar.
Yeah.
Because I realized that if, thanks to Weston Price, if you get your whole diet right and you're eating enough animal fat, among other things, that was the crucial ingredient he found. You can get away with eating a bit more sugar than I had been eating for many, many years before that.
Let me ask you a question. I'd like to get your take. Why do you think so many of the carnivore type people and low carb people have moved on to the Ray Peat type paradigm in recent years. You had famously folks like even Mercola, Dr. Mercola has now been moving towards, he was a very big proponent of a low carb paleo type diet for years, one of the biggest stars, if I'm not mistaken, in that field. And he has shifted in recently towards, he said, I was very dismissive of Ray Peat for many years. And then I re-looked at him, and he's been, talking to Georgie Dinkoff, and he's even been, partnering now with Brad Marshall, doing some stuff with experimenting with the, high starch, low fat. So you got him, you have people like Paul Saladino, Mr. Carnivore, makes, puts, he wouldn't be, he was put onto that because he was promoting carnivore diet. And then along the way, he says, well, I did ketosis too long. I didn't like how it was making my fasting, my blood sugar, insulin was a little higher than I wanted. I wasn't having the energy I wanted. I wasn't having the sleep quality I wanted. And I found that as I add lots of fruits, raw milk, and honey alongside my nose to tail eating, it balances out everything. And he's been very pro Ray Peat in a lot of his discussions recently. And then you have people like the Strong Sisters. They were carnivore people, advocates of the, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they've now, they were on that show, The Doctors, with Paul Saladino, where they were making a scary, that was like the first time TV land had ever addressed the carnivore diet as a thing. They were brought on as the poster children of that. They've now moved over into the Ray Peat type paradigm. Georgie Dinkoff himself was a low carb guy who's moved into this Ray Peat paradigm and is a big proponent of it. And there's a lot of other folks in a similar vein. I mean, a carnivore Aurelius is a popular account on Twitter, anonymous guy. I think he's been on Rick Rubin's show and other programs like even Tucker, I think. And he has moved from a carnivore to a pro sugar. Why do you think there's been this move? Is it just because people are perpetually looking for the next, dark secret that undermines the establishment even further? Okay, we figured out the establishment was lying about saturated fat and red meat, but it's not good enough. We need to go to even darker truth. Sugar is lied about. Is that what it is? This perpetual need to rebel? I mean, that's one way to dismiss it. Or is it that there's something that they're fighting,
Well, there's definitely, the whole novelty aspect to it for some folks. I had Paul Saladino on my podcast a little while ago to discuss exactly why he made this transition. And, a big part of it for him was going to visit, I think it was the Hadza in Africa, and seeing what they actually ate in a natural environment. And, they eat a fair bit of honey. They also have a fair bit of calories from eating that fair bit of honey. I looked at that paper again today where, the Hadza are one of the only hunter-gatherer tribes who have high rates of dental cavities because they go out into the wilderness and they eat as much honey as they can get their hands on. So it's not without, and what I've been saying for years is, you're eating too much sugar or too much carbohydrates when you start getting cavities. Right. So, yeah, I think part of it's novelty. Part of it's just the simple fact that there are virtually no humans who ate a carnivorous diet, right? There are a couple of Arctic populations, like the Eskimo and the Sami in Scandinavia. Even they only ate it in the winter when they couldn't get
a lot of glycogen too?
Plants.
Did they get a lot of glycogen from their animals that they were eating, like a lot of carbohydrate?
Apparently glycogen breaks down into lactic acid pretty quickly after an animal dies. So no, I don't think they got a lot of glycogen. Glycogen is a major source of, certainly not fructose. So it was kind of just natural to start coming back to the more natural human diet, which is a mixed diet, or omnivores. We can do well apparently on a carnivorous diet. And certainly, as I was talking to Paul, if you're really sick, and as my personal doctor, Josh Durham, is discovering in his practice now that he's left his hospital, you can cure people really fast by putting them just on a carnivore diet if they're sick from the standard American diet. Now, Are they going to need to eat that way for the rest of their lives? I don't think so. I think that once you start fixing the basic, and this has been my experience, once you start fixing the problem with your metabolism, then you get a lot more flexibility. Although it can take some time before that flexibility comes back.
Now, see, that's where the Ray Peat bioenergetic people differ a little bit. Is they'll say if you do ketosis long term, you're going to make your body more inefficient at dealing with the reintroduction of fructose and glucose, right? Would you say that's a possibility?
I'm not aware of any evidence for that, and
Yeah.
I've looked for years.
But I mean, isn't it anecdotally, if you let's do a zero carb diet for like 6 months or a year, and then you just start eating sugar after you've got to your goal weight or whatever you're trying to do, aren't you going to gain weight pretty fast typically?
No.
Or, no?
No. I mean, when I did my, I've been on a keto, I was on a keto diet starting in like 2010 and did it for years. And then I did my rice experiment where I think this was right after my daughter. Oh, yeah, it was right after my daughter moved to Japan and started losing all of this weight. And I asked her, "What are you eating?" And she said, "More rice than I've ever eaten in my entire life." So I was like, okay, well, let's try that. I'll eat like a Japanese person and see what happens. And what happened was basically nothing. It didn't make a difference because by that point I'd been, I had fixed most of what was wrong with my metabolism.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think being on a ketogenic diet long term is necessary. I think intermittent ketosis, where you're not eating sugar all the time and you're eating, is probably the optimal way to eat because that replicates most closely how we would have been eating on a Paleolithic diet.
Remember in our first interview with Ray Peat, he said that he did not like the stressful process that your body undergoes to produce its own ketones, but he did like the idea of getting ketones from food. So do you see anything to that?
Your body making ketones, it's not stressful in the sense of bad. It's just like making glucose, right? It's a reaction to adrenaline. So if you run a race or you get chased by a lion, your body is going to make a lot of highly accessible fuel, right? And that is glucose and ketones, right? And they're both, I mean, they've looked at marathon runners who eat a high carb diet. At the end of the marathon race, their ketone levels are very high also. And it's not because, they were in ketosis at the start of the race. It's because the stress of exercise, a beneficial stress, a good for you stress, made them make ketones.
Yeah.
So yeah, this argument that, being on a ketogenic diet is going to cause any negative effect, I'm not aware of any good evidence.
But what do you think?
I think we went over this with Georgi Dinkov on the debate that we did. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of people have been on ketogenic diets over the last several decades. With the protein sparing modified fasts like the OptiFast and MetaFast and all that goes back to the 70s. And, with the Atkins diet, millions of people have been on ketogenic diets since, the late 1960s, I guess, when Atkins' first book came out, or maybe early 1970s. The Atkins diet book is one of the best-selling books in all of history. I mean, it's on like the top 20 list up there with the Bible. So that's a lot of people. And if you go look in the literature, you can find a handful of instances where people had a bad outcome on that diet. And it's generally because of some genetic mutation. There are people who can't metabolize ketones. Those people shouldn't be on a ketogenic diet.
Do you think, though, that knowing what you know about the problems with so many vegetables and so many other different things that, if you had to choose between, okay, you're going to build your health diet on meat and animal foods, plus, is the plus going to be seeds, nuts, and vegetables, or is the plus going to be maybe fruit and honey? Like what's the plus that's the better plus there if you don't want to eat meat only in your life?
It's definitely going to be the former. It's going to be the fruit, vegetables, seeds, and seeds, and not honey and
Fruit.
sugar.
So you think seeds,
I mean,
nuts?
some fruit, in a package, an orange or an apple is fine. The problem becomes refined carbohydrates,
Yeah,
like honey is a refined carbohydrate, or, table sugar, or, fruit juice. That's when you start getting into trouble.
right.
I've not seen any good evidence. I mean, unless you're a very brittle diabetic, meaning your blood sugar is super susceptible to sugar consumption, I'm not aware of really any evidence for harm from fruit consumption.
Yeah.
Fruitarians aside, you can't just eat fruit, kids. Don't do that at home or
No.
anywhere.
I want to move to the topic of what we've uh, been talking about in the past, which is the state of the public's awareness of the problem of PUFA and seed oils in general and specific. You guys, you were involved with the CD app, right? And I wanted to know what the latest is with that. That CD app.
CD's still chugging along. I haven't looked at the download figures lately. CD is Brian Curley, also known as the seed oil disrespecter on Twitter, who's a physician practicing in a hospital down in Kentucky. Had this idea. Well, his wife actually had the idea of putting out lists of foods that people can buy at supermarkets to help them shop, because that's definitely one of the more difficult things to do to try and eat a healthier diet. I mean, not everybody. I once, when I was starting out on this, went to the Whole Foods and spent my lunch hour in the salad dressing aisle reading all the labels. And I was able to find a single bottle of salad dressing that didn't have seed oils in it. It was made with olive oil. So that's hard work. At the time, I didn't have any option. I would have loved to have been able to go, I mean, Mark Sisson wasn't selling his avocado oil mayonnaise back then. So mayonnaise was like off the menu for me unless I made it myself, which was too much, again, too much work for me to want to do on a regular basis. So that's a great option for people who, want to be able to go to the supermarket and not have to struggle with trying to find things that are not full of seed oils. And pretty much everything in the supermarket outside of the produce and the, even the meat, even the butcher's got a problem with the pork and the chicken. But so, yeah, that's for folks who are trying to figure out, okay, I understand what's happened and I'm trying to eat a better diet, or they're trying to recommend it to a family member who may not be willing to put all this effort into it. Because that is the biggest downside of a healthy diet, is the convenience factor, right? In America, we've made it so incredibly convenient to eat unhealthy food that it's become a bit of a chore to try and eat a healthy diet. So this is to make that easier.
So
And
what does the app do?
it helps you identify foods in different categories in the supermarket that don't contain seed oils.
Okay,
So
so it
like
like tells,
breads.
yeah, it'll tell you what brands to look for and which
Right,
options in the brands and stuff.
right.
And so, how's it going? Has it been well received? Is there barriers to entry into this? What do you think is
Well,
the?
there are no barriers to entry because there are no competitors for it. It's just, people are getting more and more aware of it. So, it's chugging along. So we're happy with that. And, we've got, it's early stages now. People are, I mean, to a question you asked when we were setting this call up is, how is the research going? I was riding the chairlift up when I was skiing this winter, and I got a lecture from a nurse about how the biggest problem in our diet is that we eat too many seed oils. I was like, you don't say. And I've had that happen a number of times over the past couple of years, where particularly younger people are like, oh, seed oils is a problem. And I'm like, huh. And I'm always kind of surprised, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be, but, the message is definitely getting out there. And physicians are starting to get a little more clear on this. I injured my knee at the end of the year and had to go see an orthopedic surgeon. Luckily, he didn't have to do anything, but even he was telling me the importance of omega fats for cartilage health. He didn't quite have the story down, but I was impressed that he was, aware of it and aware that, omega-3 fats would be beneficial to or to cartilage health. Again, he didn't really have the story down, but he was a surgeon, not a, not a, surgeons, if you've torn your knee and you're going to see a surgeon like that guy, it's way too late for your diet to help you out.
Now
But there was awareness there, and I was kind of surprised to hear that.
Well, that brings up a point. One of the things we discussed in our first interview with Ray Peat was his dislike for omega-3s. He doesn't like the fish oil supplement industry. He thinks it's largely a scam like the vegetable oil business. And he talked about how unstable omega-3s are and how oxidized they are and rancid they are and how they cause a lot of the similar, they have a lot of negative effects that are not, looked at by a lot of the people who are proponents of fish oil and fatty fish consumption. And that dovetailed into him discussing his theory, which is that he thinks the so-called essential fatty acids of omega-3 and omega-6 are not necessarily needed. He talks about newborns having a deficiency of these so-called fatty acids in their brain and how over time, we see an accumulation, in older brains of omega-3s. And he says that's a defect of our diets, not something that is the way nature necessarily intended us. When you don't want to have all this accumulation of omega-3s, you want to be able to produce meat acid, omega-9, in the absence of these essential fatty acids, which are pretty hard to avoid. Let's be real.
Yeah, I mean, so first thing, I do think that omega-3 and omega-6 fats are essential. Which ones and how much is a definite open question. I don't think there are some pretty consistent genetic mutations that we see around the world that are thought to result from eating. Possibly. They don't understand them entirely, but they tend to happen in populations that eat a lot of fish. Yeah. So it is potentially the case that excess omega-3 fats could be harmful. Clearly, rancid fats are not going to be great for you, although even there, the evidence for that is not awesome. I mean, Japan for a long time their primary diet was based upon fish, and especially salted fish that was stored. And they've been known to be one of the longest lived populations on Earth for all of their written history. So, can you eat too much? Yeah, but it's not something I think most people really need to be worried about based on the evidence we have from the Japanese. Of course, the Japanese don't eat a lot of fish. They're mostly on a vegetarian diet. They eat a lot more vegetables and starch than they do fish. So that can balance it out. I mean, you have to remember, if you want to eat, if you really, really, really want to eat a low-fat diet, and then one of the best ways, or rather a low PUFA diet, then one of the ways to do that is to eat a lot of rice, because excess rice in your body is going to be converted into saturated and monounsaturated fats, but not polyunsaturated fats, because your body can't make that conversion.
Is that just rice or all grains?
Rice, most of the polyunsaturated fat in rice is removed in the bran. That's why they eat white rice and not brown rice, because the omega-6 fats in rice go rancid pretty quickly and make it unedible. So yeah, I'm not, there's definitely some interesting papers out there showing that if you consume a lot of alcohol, then omega-3 fats are pretty positively bad for you. That might explain the situation in places like Finland, where their traditional diet seemed to be pretty harmful for them, where they're, but drinking too much alcohol and anything else is going to be bad for you.
But if your body produces its own meat acid in the absence of these, is that not a sign that you don't really necessarily need them, and perhaps maybe you should produce more meat acid?
I think it's possible that the optimal level of polyunsaturated fats is that where your body is producing some level of meat acid. The problem with that is I've only come across a single human case study that looked at that, where a woman was on a, what they call parenteral nutrition, where she couldn't eat food. She had to be, she had to be fed. Parenteral nutrition is basically, you're getting a bag and a IV, and she had really high meat acid rates and was able to bear 2 children while she was on this super low fat diet with super high levels of meat acid in her body. Now, that said, there is really good evidence that if you put a growing child on a diet like that, they are going to have really bad outcomes. So it may just be that because that woman was an adult, her requirement for polyunsaturated fats were a lot lower. I recently interviewed Tony, oh goodness, I can't remember his name, but the book, it escapes me right now. The book is called The Omega Balance. He's a zoologist, and his specialty was looking at PUFA balance in membranes in various different species. Tony Hulbert, various different species of animals. And I mean, there's no question that polyunsaturated fats are essential fats in the diet, and that there are lots of cases of, experimental animals not developing their brains correctly, not developing their nervous systems correctly, not developing their eyes correctly, absent polyunsaturated fats. And he explains that that's because of the physical characteristics of the fats, right? The omega-3 fats are more mechanically active when they're in cell membranes, and that actually affects the function of the cell membrane and therefore the function of the entire cell. So in things like the retina of your eye, that function is crucial. And even going from an omega-3 to an omega-6 fat, you see a difference in eye function just based on how much more active the omega-3 fats are in the membrane than the omega-6 fats. So yeah, I think there's a really good argument, certainly for omega-6 fats, that we need a lot less than we're getting right now. But I don't think you can extrapolate that to we don't need any, and that we could get away with just having nothing but meat acid in the diet. Meat acid, which is produced in the body from omega-9 fats like oleic acid that we can both.
What are the properties of meat acid that don't make it sufficient for providing for the functions that the omega-3s and 6s do?
Well, meat acid is a monounsaturated fat, so it's only got one double bond in the fat, right? Unlike polyunsaturated fats, which have multiple double bonds. And the more double bonds the fat has, the more physically active it's going to be in the membrane, right? And there are a lot of membrane pumps, things that, pump, say, sodium in and out of the cell, that actually depend on the fact that these fats are mechanically active, which is why, for instance, fish that live in colder waters have more polyunsaturated fats in their membranes than fish that live in warmer waters, because they're more dependent on the fact that these fats are going to be active at lower temperatures. And bacteria, for instance, will change the composition of their membranes dynamically upon temperature changes, because they need to be able to keep these pumps working on a constant basis. And the pumps are dependent upon the fatty acid composition of the cell membrane, which is comprised in large part of various different lipids, different fats.
So when you see this kind of interest in awareness about seed oils, do you think it's sufficient in your estimation, to get people to just be critical of the seed oil form of PUFA, or do you think it's important to win the arguments for the culture on PUFA itself? Like you said, that, you know, we need to rethink, because a lot of people say, you know, the problem with the seed oils is the way in which they're processed, and the way in which they're made, and the way in which they're stored, and the way in which, you know, they're produced. But, you know, the PUFA itself, including omega-6, does not need to be maligned much in terms of the general levels of consumption that people make of these things. Then other people, including like a Ray Peat type and others, would be like, no, you need to move a little bit more away from PUFA in general, and don't buy the hype about, you don't need to be supplementing with fish oil. You don't need to be eating so much fatty fish like salmon. You don't need to be eating nuts and seeds. And you certainly don't need to be eating chicken fat and pork fat that's conventionally raised if you really want to take your, you know, problems with metabolism seriously. And where do you fall on that spectrum? I think you're kind of in the middle, maybe. You're not totally anti, but you're not totally, it's just the seed oil problem, you know?
Well, it's definitely a spectrum. And, you know, if you don't eat bottled seed oils ever, and you get your omega-6 from more natural sources, first off, your consumption is going to go down by a lot, right? And I mean, all seed oils in a bottle are already rancid by the time you get them, or by the time they leave the factory, right? So the rancid seed oils are the problem ultimately. You're going to get rancid seed oils in a bottle of vegetable oil without question. You're going to get rancid seed oils from a restaurant. If they're using those bottles and cooking them, they're going to make them even more rancid. If all you did, you know, if you don't cook those rancid oils, yeah, they're going to be less rancid, but they're still going to be rancid. If all you do is eat pork and chicken, you know, well, the pork and chicken we get are fed those oils, right? So, yeah, I mean, okay, if you don't ever eat out at restaurants, that's going to be better. You know, there's this sliding scale of, you know, the worst possible thing you could do, I think, is eating at a Kentucky Fried Chicken, where you're getting chicken fried in seed oils with French fries fried in seed oils on the side, and then a nice sugary drink to accelerate the oxidation of those oils when they get in your body. Saying this, you know, I mean, I've started to hear this argument, oh, you know, linoleic acid isn't really the problem. It's not the excess linoleic acid. Well, that's like, you know, pouring gasoline all over your house and saying, I don't have a problem. You know, it's primed for a problem, right? And you can't really you can't distinguish. It's a bit disingenuous to say at that point, oh, the fact that my house is soaked in gasoline isn't a problem, because you're going to flip a light switch and you're going to have a problem, right? That's all it's going to take at that point. So yeah, the fact that we're eating excess linoleic acid is a huge problem, because your body is a oxidation machine. And through a variety of different pathways in your body, it's going to cause these fats to oxidize, even if you're not eating any oxidized omega-6 fats, right? It's going to get into your mitochondria. It's going to oxidize there because of the actions of the oxidative process in your mitochondria. It's going to be when you get a cold, your body defends against a cold by oxidizing fats. I mean, just simply being sick is enough to cause the omega-6 fats in your membranes to become oxidized, because your body uses them as toxins to defend itself, right? And I mean, that became super clear during COVID when I wrote a post looking at omega-6 fats and bad outcomes from the physiological process that kills you when you're sick with COVID, acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, right?
Yeah.
ARDS is what kills you when you're sick with COVID, and ARDS is worse when you have higher levels of omega-6 fats in your body. And the reason it's worse is because your body converts those omega-6 fats into toxins, specifically a toxin called leukotoxin-diol, which we did an episode talking to Bruce Hammock about, and he is one of the fellows who discovered that pathway, part of that pathway anyway. So yeah, it's, and that's why if you take people and who are sick in the intensive care unit and you feed them a lot of soybean oil, they're going to have a worse outcome. And that's well understood in the medical literature, that the fact that you're giving them a high amount of omega-6 fats, not cooked, as medical grade, as unoxidized as possible, but it's still going to produce a worse outcome than if you're giving them another healthier fat like a fish oil, which doesn't seem to have any bad outcome whatsoever, even if you're on it for years.
Yeah. I think that I wanted to get your take on this. Reminded me of a thread, a Twitter account named Sixers posted a few times about how he thinks that it's the introduction of vegetable oil and fry oil, which really accounts for the somewhat of a delayed response to the introduction of PUFAs and vegetable oils into the diet, and the spike in obesity that we see in American populations. It seems like it spikes really high starting in the 1980s, and he says that if this vegetable oils were being used in the early 1900s, 1920s, 1940s, you still don't see too much of a skyrocketing of obesity. It's not until the deep fry oils are coming out in mass in the 80s that you see the obesity spike in the 80s. He says in the 1970s, Burger King switched from using lard to Fry Max, a vegetable oil product in their deep fryers. In 1990, McDonald's switched from beef tallow to a vegetable oil blend. These changes were part of a larger trend that began right when obesity kicked off. He says oil degradation can explain the amount of anecdotes about weight loss and other health improvements that come from removing seed oils. But so he's suggesting that it's really the frying of the oil, not vegetable oils itself, that causes the spike in obesity based on the data of the correlation.
Well, he's wrong about when the obesity epidemic started. The obesity epidemic started in the late 1800s, which is about the same time that we started consuming vegetable oils at scale, right? With the introduction of cottonseed oil into the human diet.
But it was an epidemic in proportion to what they were expecting in their population, not.
Well, but of course, that's the point, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen a decline in metabolic rate as measured by body temperature and an increase in body mass ever since then. Now, why did it kick off so much in the late 1970s, 1980s? I think it was because of the dietary guidelines, and because we really, really, really at that point started avoiding animal fats. And after the dietary guidelines, the companies like McDonald's came under a lot of pressure from the vegan lobby, and the dietitians started reformulating foods at corporations to eliminate animal fats. Now, animal fats can be protective against obesity, right? They compete with omega-6 polyunsaturated fats in the diet, which is why, for instance, you see, if you want to give a person diabetes, you give them soybean oil. If you give them dairy fat, you see that they become protected against diabetes and heart disease. What? Dairy fat's protective against heart disease? After all those years of being told that, yeah, well, unfortunately, that's the case, is that, they did a bait and switch. They told us that animal fats were harmful for us and that seed oils were beneficial for us, even though they've known since the 1960s that seed oils were harmful for us.
Yeah.
And at some point, we went over a tipping point where, we weren't getting enough healthy fats. All we were getting were the unhealthy fats. And, obesity just exploded.
Yeah. So you think it's the government's guidelines that really pushed that in the 1970s and 80s? It
Well,
really,
I mean, for instance, nowadays, I haven't looked into all the regulations, but nowadays, if you run a hospital, you're required to serve food. You are legally required to serve food that follows the dietary guidelines. The military is legally required to serve food that follows the dietary guidelines.
yeah.
The military has had an obesity epidemic for
So
years.
they don't cook with butter in the military.
No, they don't cook
Ah,
with butter in
that's
the
horrible.
military.
No wonder they've got so many
Schools, when they
transgender
serve,
people there.
yeah, that's a question. Schools, when they serve food, are required to follow the dietary guidelines. If you want to put a healthy label, if you want to put a label on your food saying it's healthy, you're not allowed to do that unless you're following the dietary guidelines, right? And of course, everybody wants healthy food, and that led to idiocies like things like Fruit Loops being called heart healthy, and the AHA putting its heart healthy logo on corn oil, even though they've known since the 1960s that corn oil causes heart disease.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's the problem goes back a lot farther than most people understand, right? It isn't something that started in the 1990s. Recognition of this goes back to at least the 50s and the 60s. And the beginning of the problem goes all the way back to the 1800s, even longer than that. I mean, historically, where did diabetes first appear? It first appeared in India, which was one of the first populations that started consuming large quantities of seed oils thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And what do they eat in India? They eat a low fat, high carbohydrate diet that is low in animal fats and high in seed oils. And they are in the middle of a massive diabetes epidemic, right? So the goal population of the American dietary guidelines is India, and they are not doing well on that diet.
Wow. What is the least amount of, what is the lowest PUFA containing dietary fat that one can consume?
Coconut oil.
That's less PUFA than like dairy fat and butter and tallow.
Yep.
By a lot.
I think it's 0.5% linoleic acid. Butter, depending on where it comes from, can be from like 1% to 3% linoleic acid.
So if one wants to lower their PUFA and deplete it faster in their body, one could theoretically perhaps use like MCT oil or coconut oil, consume that.
Yeah, I mean,
you're going to get enough fat to keep everything going and what your body needs fat wise, but get the minimal amount of intake of PUFA. Is that right?
Yeah, you would want to look at the Catawbans, who are one of the classic healthy populations. They smoked, they didn't have obesity, they didn't have heart disease, they didn't have diabetes, and they ate a lot of starch. I think it was sweet potatoes, so probably a fair bit of sugar and a lot of coconut fat and a lot of fish. So they were getting, a high level of omega-3 PUFA relatively, and, starch and coconut fat. So, and they did just fine on that diet, far better than any American does.
You said they were getting a high amount of omega-3s, or you're saying they were getting a low?
Well, they lived on an island in the South Pacific, so they were eating a lot of fish.
Yeah. I thought,
right? And again, they're warm
is that
water
the colder,
fish. So,
is that colder fish or warm water fish?
yeah, they're in the tropics, so they're getting, lower PUFA warm water fish.
So it'd be more saturated fat.
Right. That's right.
What does that taste like, by the way? I don't have access to, is it, I'm imagining it's probably cooks real good, like a buttery fish, high saturated fat, a tropical fish, or what do they like? Because
yeah, I mean, I guess I can't mahi is probably a tropical fish. That tastes good. I mean,
yeah.
I went to Ecuador a long time ago and ate a lot of fish while I was there, and it was all delicious. So, I don't know. I think I'd probably prefer it to some of the fattier fish like mackerel. I mean, I'm partial to mackerel and sardines and all that stuff, but
yeah,
I can't really eat too much of it.
So if you were to follow a higher carb paradigm with a lower fat intake, would you be more inclined to follow the pro fruit sugar diet of a Ray Peat or the pro starch paradigm of someone like Brad Marshall, where he's lowering his fat, lowering his protein intake, but increasing his starch, his low BCAA starch. So he's eating a lot of cassava flour. Would you, if you were to go on that paradigm, would you be more pro sugar consumption or pro starch, or a mixture of both?
I would go with the starch.
Yeah.
There was a study that was flying around on X a couple of weeks ago, that was basically looking at polyunsaturated fats compared against sugar and starch, right? And the negative effects came with the polyunsaturated fats. Adding sugar to that didn't make it any worse, but didn't make it better. Adding starch to that surprisingly made it a lot better.
Does that mean consuming polyunsaturated fats or just having polyunsaturated fat in your body?
All the harm that they saw in that diet design from the high fat diet was coming from the polyunsaturated fats. And if they added sugar on top of that, it didn't make things any better. But if they added starch on top of it, it did improve things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would be inclined, plus there's the whole, I don't think there's anything magical about eating lots of sugar. I guess I'm not a Ray Peter in that respect.
What about the idea that starch is going to be more spiking of your insulin, and that's one of the reasons that people might not want to go with starches if you're going to add a carbohydrate to your diet.
Insulin resistance is caused by seed oils, not by starch or sugar.
Yeah.
So if you're not eating what causes it, then your body is going to have a normal insulin reaction to eating
even if you've been eating
sugar.
it for decades.
That gets into
that's everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that gets into the bigger question: is the damage repairable? Right? I mean, if you're not diabetic and you take the thing that's causing diabetes out of your diet, then I don't think you need to worry about the fact that your insulin goes up a little bit when you eat starch or sugar.
Yeah.
Right? That's the normal reaction. And again, we've been eating sugar longer than we've been eating starch or, seed oils, really, if you think about it that way. So, yeah, we have insulin for a reason, right? To help us dispose of those they're not fats, of those carbohydrates that can be harmful in excess. So, yeah, just the fact that it's going up a little bit, if your insulin's going sky high, that's an indicator that you're eating too much seed oils, not that you're eating necessarily too much carbohydrates. And I mean, you look at the populations that eat crazy amounts of carbohydrates, like the Japanese after World War II, where they were getting 84% of their calories from carbohydrates. Well, what happened over the next few decades? They started eating more seed oils and their diabetes rates went up, but their carbohydrate consumption went down, right? Or the Tucasenta, another population in the South Pacific, they get 94% of their calories from sweet potatoes, right? Which are like 7% sugar and the rest is starch. 94% of their calories. I mean, it's crazy. And they are lean. They're not the healthiest people on earth, but they don't have obesity and they don't have diabetes.
Yeah. What do you make of the claim, though, that the starches will feed endotoxin in the gut, which will increase your stress, will stress your body and increase estrogen and other things that may be kind of fighting against your metabolic health?
What I'd be more concerned about is the fact that seed oils turn into endotoxin mimicking chemicals in the body, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's what causes autoimmune reactions, is that your body is mistaking your own organs for bacterial or viral infections, right? Because along with an obesity epidemic, we also have an epidemic of autoimmunity. And I would argue that type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease are both autoimmune diseases at root, right? Just like with poison ivy, which is a polyunsaturated fat, it causes your body to think that it's foreign and to attack itself. Seed oils do the exact same thing when they're in your body.
Yeah. I sent you a paper. I don't know if you got a chance to see it. Probably not, but
Oh, the one on bipolar?
yeah. What did you think of that? It's a story in psychologicalpost.org says an omega-6 fatty acid known as arachidonic acid may reduce bipolar disorder risk. Now, I thought Tucker Goodrich told us to watch out for arachidonic acid.
Well, you know,
You've been debunked, Tucker.
I did see this, and here's what I saw. The version that I saw had the title that you've got here. And then when I saw it, they had changed the title to Seafood, Eggs, and Meat May Help Lower the Risk of Bipolar Disorder, right? Because seafood, eggs, and meat are the dietary sources of arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid can be made from seed oils, but saying seafood, eat, and meat may help lower the risk of bipolar disorder is very different from the headline that you sent me, which was an omega-6 fatty acid known as arachidonic acid may reduce bipolar disorder risk. So, yeah, I'll go with the meat is better for it interpretation,
here's a
which
quote
I think
that says,
is defensible, because there's a lot of evidence going back, decades at this point that overconsumption of omega-6 fats is related to poor mental health. I mean, Bill Lanz, who's one of the fathers of the field, was saying that for a long time.
Here's the study. It says the quote from this article says the study uncovered 33 metabolites associated with bipolar disorder, most of which were lipids. A key finding was that a genetic predisposition to higher levels of lipids containing arachidonic acid was linked to a lower risk of bipolar disorder. Conversely, higher levels of lipids containing linoleic acid were associated with a higher risk.
There you go.
There you go. This pattern suggests that the pathway converting linoleic acid to arachidonic acid is crucial in modulating bipolar disorder risk.
I mean, that suggests that it's an inflammatory disease, because what happens during inflammation, it's almost sounds like a chicken and the egg story, but your body is causing inflammation, right? Inflammation doesn't happen to you. And how does your body do that? Your body does it by converting omega-6 fats in your body into pro-inflammatory messengers that tell your body to start an inflammatory reaction. In the course of doing that, the omega-6 levels go down because it's being used up, right? It's like when you go on a drive with your gas tank, the gas in the gas tank goes down. It goes down because it's moving you along, right? It doesn't go down because of some other process. It's literally the omega-6 fats are what are causing the inflammation in your body, right? It's how your body causes inflammation, is to turn omega-6 fats into pro-inflammatory metabolites. So yeah, it suggests that, it could be that it's an inflammatory reaction that's causing bipolar disorder. And they see that in, depression and in, ARDS that I mentioned before. In the course of an infection, your omega-6 levels go down because that's what your body is using to fuel the inflammatory process.
Did you say years ago or something one time that arachidonic acid is the pathway that's blocked when you're taking a painkiller and it's numbing you from the sensation of pain?
Well, that was Bruce Hammock. He said 75% of the drugs sold in the world by weight are blocking the conversion of arachidonic acid into inflammatory mediators. Yeah, 75% of the drugs sold in the world by weight. That's crazy, because you think about aspirin, NSAIDs, steroids, all of those are blocking the conversion of omega-6 fats into pro-inflammatory
But you
mediators.
just said that arachidonic acid is coming from other fats outside of omega-6, right?
Yeah, but arachidonic acid, your body gets a teeny amount of it from meat, right? Meat doesn't
Okay.
have all that much of it. The problem is you're literally keeping the levels topped off all the time if you have high levels of linoleic acid in the body. And we
Okay,
see that
so
in the
so is arachidonic acid a type of omega-6 or it's
it's an omega, yeah, it's the long chain omega-6 fat.
yeah.
That is the one. Back to the question about which of these fats are essential. Arachidonic acid is essential. Linoleic acid is not. Okay. Linoleic acid is essential to the extent that it can be converted into arachidonic acid if you're not getting enough of it in your diet. Same thing holds true for the omega-3 fats. The essential ones are EPA and DHA, the ones that you get from animal fats and not the plant fat alpha linolenic acid that you get from flaxseed or soybean oil or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Those are the ones that you actually need. And that's what you get from meat, and that's exactly what you need in the proportions that you need generally, and you don't get this vast excess of PUFAs that you get from eating seed oils.
So in other words, if you want to reduce the tendency to have mental illness, you probably want to reduce these PUFAs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, that's what
Stop eating the chicken fat so much too. I mean, you have to hit the chicken fat. A lot of people tear up chicken every day.
And that's why people going on a carnivore diet are seeing such benefits, right? Because if you're eating nothing but beef, you are going to see a much, much, much lower intake of omega-6 fats. You're going to be getting the omega-6 and the omega-3 fats more in the proportion that your body actually needs them. And that's probably why I think, and plus you're getting all of these antioxidants like carnosine that are actually able to protect your body against the unhealthy oxidation of these fats, right? It's kind of a triple benefit, right? Less of the bad stuff, you're getting the right proportion in the right amount, and you're getting the things that protect you against when they go bad all at the same time.
Are you of the camp that you think people should balance what they eat in muscle meat with gelatin and collagen and connective tissue proteins?
I take gelatin every morning in my coffee. It's probably not
you pour the powder into your coffee.
Yeah, I put a little bit of a scoop, about 3/4 of a scoop of gelatin.
Do you
in
let
my
it bloom
coffee.
first? Do you let it bloom first, or do you just mix it in as a lumpy clump?
It generally stirs in pretty well. I stir it as I'm pouring the coffee in. And it works pretty well. It doesn't change the taste of the coffee. It changes the texture a little bit. It's kind of nice. The only real downside to it that I've noticed so far is that if you let your coffee cup sit around for too long, it turns into Jello, which I don't find super appetizing.
So you think it's important to balance your muscle meat consumption with some good collagen and gelatin, right?
I mean, it gets back to what are we supposed to be eating, right? We'd be eating nose to tail. I mean, if you go to Japan, tendon's considered a delicacy over there, right? It's not like the United States where people spit out the gristle. I make a point when I'm eating a steak, the only thing left is the bone. I eat all the gristle, all the fat, because
do you sprinkle Jello onto your steak?
No, I do not. That would probably be a bad thing. I think
Jello used to be very
extreme.
popular. Jello was a very big deal before, Bill Cosby was shamed and everything and disgraced. Jello was a big brand. Remember, everybody would talk about Jello. Now.
Oh yeah, when I was growing up, Jello was like.
Now it's something that you only see in nursing homes, and maybe it needs to be brought back.
Yeah, I mean, Jello's good. I started out with doing orange juice Jello actually, because the original papers that I saw suggested that gelatin plus vitamin C give you a benefit in cartilage repair. So that's why I started doing it. And then my wife had been doing it for years before we got married, and says she's seen a lot of benefits from it from a car accident injury. And I like it in my coffee. I like the texture it gives to the coffee. So it's not like it's not like I'm going out of my way. I just put a little extra scoop in the morning in my coffee,
Yeah. But
along
Tucker,
with my grass-fed dairy, half and
no,
half,
yeah,
or full cream that I put in every morning.
yeah. I appreciate having you on, Tucker. It's always great having you on, and we'll have to do it again sooner. And anything you'd like to promote, please do so and share us your links. Is it yelling-stop.blogspot.com?
That is deprecated. I'm now Tucker Goodrich
Wow. I
on
remember having to
Substack.
promote that URL on my radio audience when I had 2 seconds to go.
You were
I
doing
was
God's work, David.
yelling
I
stop
appreciate that.
dot over underscore. I said, my God.
Yeah, it's
The
still, the
mouthpiece.
blog is still called Yelling Stop, but now it's on Substack, and you can just look for my name and it'll pop right up.
So what
And
is it? TuckerGoodrich.substack.com
that's
or
it.
or TuckerGoodrich.com? Is it?
Not TuckerGoodrich.com. I haven't gotten to that point yet.
Who is that
Let's not be too
imposter?
fancy.
Is that somebody else that's got that?
No, that's me. I just haven't
Oh,
done anything with it.
yeah.
Um, and then I've got, again, Tucker Goodrich on YouTube for the podcast episodes, and it's on Apple and Spotify and all those other things.
What are some upcoming topics you're going to be exploring this year or this summer or whatever? What's on the menu?
God, I've got a whole backlog. I've got an interview coming up with Zach Bitter, the ultra runner, talking about his dietary experiences. I am going to be talking to a woman, Mary Newport, who has actually done a lot of work with MCT oils and Alzheimer's disease, and recently wrote.
I've had her on my show, I think.
Yeah, she just came out with a really neat paper looking at.
She treated her husband with it, right?
That's correct. And she just did another paper on that topic. But what got my attention is she wrote a paper that I had been thinking about doing for quite a while, going through how the American Heart Association misrepresented the findings from their seed oils trials over the years, step by step, looking at everything along the way. So I'm really looking forward to talking to her about that and getting into some of the details. Because part of the whole reason why they downplay a ketogenic diet is because of this risk that it's going to raise your LDL cholesterol, right? And that's how they're like, oh, don't make your LDL go up. Well, you know what? I don't think there's any good evidence that matters.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to talk to her about exactly what prompted her to do that research. Because as far as I could tell, she got pretty much everything right. And I've done a lot of research in that. So it should be that should be a must listen, I think.
Oh, very good.
Because I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they've been committing research fraud since the 1960s consistently, and Lord knows how many people have been sicker than they ought to have been as a result of that.
Wow. All right. Well, thanks, and keep up the great work, Tucker. We'll look
David,
forward to
thanks
talking
for
to you
having me
soon.
back on. Great to see you.
Take care.
Bye.